And with ANIMA, Serpieri collection Druuna 0, the Druuna saga, for me, comes to an end. I have read them all. First of all, this book is, I believe, meant by publisher Los Caballero to be the first Druuna book that you read. I read it last. I think it was really because I didn't really know it was there until I had bought most of the first 5. I just sort of assumed it was the ending. I think it was meant to be the beginning, but we'll talk about that in the end. So this book is very different from the rest of the Druuna series. It seems to be sort of not necessarily a part of the series, but it is. Anyway, it begins with an essay called Stories in the Form of an Elephant by Moreno Brattini, which is presented in Italian, German, English, and Spanish. It begins with what to me is sort of at once hyperbolic, right? But also an accurate kind of claim. Let's take a look at that. We cannot be absolutely certain that the universe we live in was created by God. As we know, some people harbor more than a few doubts. Instead, there is no doubt whatsoever that an artist can create an entire world and forge it into his own image and likeness. Art is a creative act that, even when it is intended to represent reality, ends up portraying one that is parallel to ours. Perhaps spectacular, but in any case alternative. The more the artist filters what is real through the deforming lens of his own vision, the more our space-time continuum is upset and a different one is created. The characteristics of the cartoon are perfectly suited to molding cosmos and microcosms, the universes from whence came the suggestions that inspired the author are remixed, giving rise to an elsewhen in literary, pictorial, musical, cinematographic, and other creations. The author is a god, and his personages, the space they move in, and in brief, everything can be as he pleases. We'll assume he or she pleases. So then the essay really goes on from there to talk almost not at all about Serpieri, really. The focus is on this next generation or next level of comics creators, which were gathered as first as the Association of Humanoids. This was around 1974, who gained an international audience in Metal Hurlant magazine, heavy metal here in the States. The essay has a particular focus on Jean Giraud, also known as Moebius, who is really, clearly the most recognizable or most recognized artist of that movement. And then Druuna 0, as you'll see, actually, if you read this thing, and you gotta read this thing, is clearly an homage, right, to Moebius' seminal work, Arzach, which if you haven't seen Arzach, I don't know where you all have been, right? But it shares the progenitor's, sort of lack of description, lack of dialogue. It is free of any particular language. It is just a visual, it's just the panels, it's just the art, it's just a visual sort of motion through. And I think that's great, right? That makes it recognizable to any language. And I think unlike the rest of the Druuna books, which had to be translated from their original Italian, this book I think is the only edition available for this, so you don't have to try to chase down the English edition. The only text in it is the essay, right, that is there in 4 different languages. At least, you can hopefully narrow in on one. Otherwise, to read the story, to experience the story, you don't need any language at all, right? near the end, right? And in terms of this being what feels like kind of a core book for the Serpieri collection, we see Serpieri actually draw himself in. We've been seeing that actually through the entire series, where he's kind of used himself as source material for a particular character throughout the series. This kind of crazy, weird robot thing that sort of follows Druuna around and sometimes helps her and sometimes just confuses her and gets her angry, sort of a foil in some cases. But here in this one, Serpieri has drawn himself in as, in a much more literal and much more meta kind of way, yeah. So the question remains then in the end, what order do you read this in? Do you read this first, as it seems the publisher kind of intends you to do, or do you read this last? I read it last, and I'm not sorry that I did. I think, honestly, if you're asking me, I would say read this one last. To me, it really felt like a coda, this sort of nod, really, not just to Moebius, right? The sort of core of that humanoids, metal hurlant group, right? But it's also a nod to a sort of thank you to almost to Druuna herself and that character. But however you read it, you do have to read the numbered books 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in order. They do tell an ongoing story. So don't, if you can help it, skip around through there. But 0, I would read it last. I would save it for last, but you do you. But whatever you do, read it, get this. And even if maybe this would be the thing, is if you're not sure that this is really for you, it's not for everybody, then this may be a good starting point, to kind of get a sense of where we're headed. The Druuna stories that are more dense, they hit a little bit harder. They have a lot more to say. They literally have dialogue in people speaking. But whatever order you read it, read this. Embrace the whole series. It's absolutely fantastic. The art is always, and I mean always, 100% of the time, completely on point, and it does not slip the slightest bit in Druuna 0. That has been, what number? Oh my gosh, I don't even remember. I want to say that was book number 20. Are we a fifth of the way through? The title of the video will have gotten that right. I will see you soon, because I remember I've been in deadline hell, deadline hell, big deadline energy. So I have been behind in making videos, but I've been reading right along. So it's been a little bit of time since I read this, which of course you sit down in one sitting and just devour that thing. And now this video. I have since finished reading Paper Boat, the collected poems of Margaret Atwood, so you'll see that video coming up pretty soon as well. And I'm charging through this 100-book challenge. And then, of course, now we come to the crucial point in the video in which you subscribe. Follow the algorithmic masters at YouTube to this video. And, of course, comment, share, do all that great stuff. And I will see you soon for Poetry by Margaret Atwood.